The great 1974 film The Godfather 2. There's a scene about halfway through it where Hyman Roth and Michael Corleone and all the American gangsters are gathered on a patio in Havana. And it's Hyman Roth's 67th birthday. And he's giving a slice of the cake each gangster. He's like, Louis from Chicago, you run the Copacabana. Frankie, you get the prostitutes. He's dividing up the island among all the American gangsters. And appropriately enough, the birthday cake has the outline of Cuba on it. So he's giving him a slice of Cuba. And while Hyman Roth is doing this, he says, isn't it great to be in a country with a government that respects private enterprise? And that's how media policies have been done in the United States for the past 50 years. And it's increasing in the last 20 years. Extraordinarily powerful lobbyists duke it out behind closed doors for the biggest slice of the cake. The public knows nothing about it. It doesn't participate. And that's the problem we face.
Media is the nervous system of a democracy. If it's not functioning well, the democracy can't function. We're heading toward an election where most people are never going to be in a room with Kerry or Bush. What they learn about the candidates will be what the media shows them or tells them, decides not to show, not to tell.
People are faced with critical choices about the future of the country when they go into the voting booth. And I go in, and I have been, through the course of a campaign cycle, subject to false, distorted, caricaturing, and I may not even know where it's coming from because often there's an echo effect off places like cable and like radio, and those wrong pieces of information are repeated and repeated. By the time it reaches me, I don't even know what the source was. This is the environment we're living in, and it's fundamentally undermining democracy, which is based on knowing some good and solid information so I can make an informed choice.
When you see the properties Rupert Murdoch owns around the world, the strong conservative point of view that those properties often reflect, it's different than ABC or CBS or NBC. Sure, they reflect a point of view, but not nearly as strong and not nearly as consistently from one ideological perspective.
Murdoch actually bought the station in 1985 and actually left us alone for at least the first 3 years of his ownership, partly because we were so successful and prosperous that there was no reason to monkey with us.
At WTTG, our success insulated us to a certain degree.
And it was kind of like being in an office and seeing people come down with the flu around you. We knew the flu eventually might reach us, but we were hoping if we took enough vitamins that we'd never catch the flu.
It was clear during those years that Murdoch, who had absolutely adored Ronald Reagan, adored him, really had a lot of admiration for the group of Republicans that controlled Congress and in Washington, certainly on Capitol Hill.
We received an order from one of Murdoch's apparatchiks, if you will, that we should cut away from our newscast and start carrying a fawning tribute to Ronald Reagan that was airing at the Republican convention. We were stunned because up until that point we were allowed to do legitimate news, and suddenly we were ordered from the top to carry propaganda, carry Republican right-wing propaganda.
There was a cultural underpinning to what Murdoch wanted. Race issues, AIDS. I constantly remember complaints that there was too much being done on AIDS. He also couldn't stand the Kennedys.
Ted Kennedy, who was a longtime opponent of Rupert Murdoch, and one celebrated occasion we were ordered to run a long uncut piece from a current affair that was rehashing the whole matter of Chappaquiddick. It had zero news value. We were told you had to run this thing uncut. You could not even edit it down and just run a snippet of it. I think they evolved in later years, especially after Roger Ailes took over and really got the Fox News Channel up and running, into a far more sophisticated kind of operation. What we saw in my era was really the birth of this sort of thing and the roots of what came later.
Yeah, I've heard directly from folks, both as correspondents and as bookers, who've expressed very great reservations, almost as if they're being monitored by a Stalinist system, afraid to be seen talking to the wrong person or having the wrong kind of email exchange. It's very much an environment of fear.
It was made very clear to us that our activities were being monitored, and if someone wasn't watching it live, they were at least recording it, and they would review it after the fact to see what we did.
We weren't necessarily, as it was told to us, a news-gathering organization so much as we were a proponent of a point of view.
I'd been warned by people. There were a number of people who pulled me inside and said, look, you know, I don't know. I mean, I know that you want to work and I know that you need a job, but you might want to think twice about taking this job because really it is a very conservative news network.
Now that I've learned comedy writing at Fox News Channel, I guess I should be doing stand-up in the clubs.
I suspect your research has discovered the memoranda that were written by former Fox employees, which were written by John Moody and by Roger, in terms of setting the tone for the day. The message of the day is a very political device.
There was nothing covert about the way the managing editors in New York or Washington operated. They made it perfectly clear what they expected from us.
Every morning there was a detailed list of subjects to talk about, not talk about. They were just actually issuing edicts to the reporters to control what they could say and how they could say it.
When headquarters sent a memo every morning and said, we want to touch on the following issues, we want to cover the following stories, we want to do them in this particular way, our job and our objective then was to execute the plan.
The real revolutionary breakthrough of Fox has been it's eliminated journalism. I mean, that's the thing to understand. What Fox News Channel has done is it's stripped out any notion of journalism as we've traditionally understood it from its product. There is no journalism at the Fox News Channel.
The techniques of odd polling and odd graphics of Democrats and weird banners in the lower third of your screen. These are all pretty sophisticated techniques, and they work in collaboration with the most genius marketing slogan in history, which is fair and balanced.
Graphics are always moving in the background. They've sort of pioneered the use of the American flag as an icon of your news broadcast.
Probably 1999 I created the Fox News Alert. We were striving to accomplish a sense of urgency. Urgency in the sense that what was about to be delivered after the Fox News Alert was very important. Quote-unquote shocking news, specifically Columbine, and all the other important news stories of that time. But now, looking back, now that I'm not there, I find it interesting that I've seen the Fox News Alert used for stories like Bennifer, J-Lo and Ben's relationship. I mean, this compared to a school shooting, and there's really no relationship to me. And I don't understand why, based on what we originally created it for, why they would choose to use it for a story like that. Because the sound and the visual is associated, or originally was associated, with things that were much more important.
They deliberately blur it, and I find it very hard to believe. You know, there's no separation between Bill O'Reilly, the interviewer, and Bill O'Reilly with his talking points. I mean, there's just no separation at all.
It's very hard on Fox News to separate news from commentary because it all blends together. That's what makes it so ridiculous, that slogan, we report, you decide, because there's no TV news channel in history that's ever reported less.
For example, a Brit Hume newscast which is presented as a newscast, I think you see a lot of attitude and opinion, both from the anchor and from the reports.
Fox blurs the line between news and commentary all over the place. And we are to believe that Brit Hume is the anchor of a news outlet. He doesn't bring strong politics to it. He just happens to anchor the newscast like Peter Jennings. On Sundays, Brit Hume turns into a rather caustic right-wing pundit.
Look, this goes to Murdoch, too. He doesn't believe in objectivity. He doesn't believe, he has contempt for journalism, I think. I mean, they wanted all news to be a matter of opinion, because opinion can't be proven false. And I think that's very dangerous, because if people don't have a set of facts that they can agree on, I think it's difficult to reach a consensus on, what's correct public policy.
It wasn't so much a scripted design that promoted the off-the-cuff ad-libs that you see so often on Fox News Channel. It was sort of a reinforcement. Any ad-lib that made the Democrats look stupid and made the Republicans look smart would get an attaboy, a pat on the back, a wink, or a nod.
Other journalists use phrases like "some people say" or "officials say" when they're trying to insert anonymously information in a story that sort of advances the storyline. Fox does it in a different way. "Some people say" is Fox's cue that I'm pretending to be an anchor, so I can't say this is my opinion or this is Roger Ailes' opinion, but some people say. Journalistically, it's a very peculiar technique, because the idea behind journalism is that you're sourcing who you're referring to. This is just sort of a clever way of inserting political opinion when you know it probably shouldn't be there.
I was given a folder, a little binder, that had the names of all the Fox News consultants, the people who were paid to come on the air to give their opinions.
To be a Fox News contributor means you're under contract and you're getting paid a set amount. My services were in great demand in December of 2001. The contract expired in January of 2003.
And the first thing that I noticed was that I recognized all of the conservatives who were in the roster. They were very well-known people who would come from, talk radio or from some sort of political background. And so I knew all of those people, and they were very, very strong people.
I came in and was always, I was going to call it as I saw it. For example, the edict came down apparently to stop referring to suicide bombings in Israel as suicide bombings, to call them homicide bombings. I thought that was stupid, and I continued to call them suicide bombings, because every bombing that kills someone is a homicide bombing.
But when I looked at the liberal roster, there was only one person's name which I recognized, and that was Bob Shrum, who is a very well-known speechwriter and political consultant in Washington. The other ones, though, were people I'd never heard of. My entire background was in politics and political journalism, so I knew pretty much all the players in D.C., and I'd never heard of these people.
The question came up about the ability of the United States to fight two wars simultaneously. And Sean Hannity, being the right-wing cheerleader that he is, was just incensed that I had the temerity to suggest that we couldn't. Facts don't seem to have any effect upon him. What was unusual is it was after that appearance that, even though I was under contract to Fox for another 8 weeks roughly, and they stopped using me.
When Richard Clark emerged, it was obvious this was a danger to the administration, because he had worked at the highest echelons of the Bush administration. And it was almost like Fox News was working off of the playbook coming out of the White House, that he had to be torn down, he had to be turned into a Democrat, a liberal, a Kerry guy.
See, one of the things that Fox does and conservatives do is they don't have to win every argument, but if they can muddy the argument enough, if they can turn it into a draw, that to them is a victory, because it denies the other side a victory. They launched a major smear campaign. In some ways, it worked.
And it was just attack politics on a TV channel. Usually you leave attack politics to a political campaign.
They'll try to put on the appearance of being balanced, but really kind of a mismatch. You'll have a Hannity and Colm show where Hannity is a really good-looking, clean-cut, all-American kind of guy, and his counterpart is a little squirrely-looking, frankly. And you kind of say, he's the liberal, well, maybe he's not so smart after all. And it sends a subtle message, I think.
A lot of the times, the liberals that they get to appear on are either faux liberals. Like, I would use Susan Estridge as an example of that. A person who is brought on who essentially agrees with the person on the right in a lot of cases. Or they would just bring on people who were very weak, people who were not well-known people.
Even the people who are supposedly liberal in those panel discussions, they know that to challenge the guests and the other hosts too forcefully, they'll certainly find someone else to stand in your place if that's the case.
We looked at Special Report's one-on-one interviews. They're once a day. We studied 25 weeks of the one-on-one guest who appeared on Special Report from late June through mid-December of 2003. Republicans appeared 5 times as often as Democrats on one-on-one newsmaker interviews. That means that Republicans made up 83% of the partisan guests, while Democrats made up just 17%. In addition, the few Democrats that were interviewed for the show tended to be centrist and conservative Democrats, often brought on to affirm Bush administration policies. So what does this all mean? Well, if Fox were the bastion of fairness and balance that it claims to be, we'd see a lot more balance in this prominent interview segment on the network's most prestigious show. Instead, the numbers indicate that Brit Hume and Special Report choose their guests based on political considerations rather than news judgment.
My criticism of Fox News isn't that it's a conservative channel. It's the consumer fraud of fair and balanced. It's nothing of the sort.
You pitch a story in any given editorial meeting that didn't meet the criteria that they had explained to you, and you got a thumbs down. Fox News Channel's stated practice was to embarrass, humiliate, challenge, or disrupt whatever Jesse Jackson and whatever Jesse Jackson did. We were told by our bureau chief on many occasions that the Reverend Jesse Jackson was one of our targets. Anything we could do or say that would embarrass him, humiliate him, discredit him, we were encouraged to find the information, and we were encouraged to report the information. Ronald Reagan's 90th birthday. For Fox News Channel viewers, though, as I was instructed, this was something akin to a holy day. This was Ronald Reagan's birthday. And so my assignment was to go to the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, and to do live shots from before dawn until dark to report on Ronald Reagan's birthday. That was pretty much the sort of vague, broad-based assignment that I had that day. It wasn't anything specific until they saw my first 3 or 4 live shots early in the morning, and Mr. Moody called in to say, what is he doing out there? Apparently my live shots weren't celebratory enough. You know, there was a class of 4th graders who came to the library that day to take the tour, and they were lined up and they sang happy birthday to you, but that was pretty much the extent of the celebration. There weren't very many people at the Presidential Library. There wasn't a celebration of in any organized way going on, And I was frankly at a bit of a loss as to what to say or do to make it seem like there was a big celebration on Ronald Reagan's birthday. So I got in trouble for that one. I got in big trouble for that one. In fact, I was suspended.
What you will see, of course, is intensive discussion about what we call the wedge issues. You'll hear, affirmative action. You'll hear abortion. You'll hear certainly gay rights. God in separation of church and state issues will be on television every single day. Their job, which is what the right-wing Republicans want to do, is to divide America up, ignore the important economic, healthcare, environmental issues, and they do that extremely successfully.
They did start up on gay marriage, but I think that they got sort of blindsided. They all of a sudden couldn't show the usual footage they used to show, because they used to love to show the footage, of course, the parades and the black leather and, the drag queens. Then they had, very kind of normal-looking, dumpy, middle-aged couples getting married and smooching on the steps of City Hall. So I've noticed a certain kind of zest going out of the gay marriage thing, but the opposite, where they've picked up the slack, is on anything to do with religion, anything to do with the Ten Commandments, anything to do with God. They're going to push God very, very hard, particularly going up into Bush's re-election.
Christian fundamentalist movement is one that believes in we're right, you're wrong, no matter what. And I saw a lot of that at Fox. We're right, you're wrong, no matter what.
The O'Reilly Factor is probably the perfect example of everything that's wrong with Fox News Channel. You have stories that are selected primarily to upset liberals and Democrats and prop up the Republican Party. You have a hostility towards guests that disagree with the host. And you have a host who, in service of his conservative politics, will distort facts, will misrepresent things, and will, in some cases, just fabricate.
Jeremy Glick is the son of a Port Authority worker who died at 9/11, and he had signed an anti-war petition, and O'Reilly had to have him on.
And they were so persistent about getting me on the O'Reilly show because they found out that I was on the advisory board and signed a statement that was against the war, and that I was directly impacted by 9/11. The success that I had on the O'Reilly show had to do, obviously, with preparation in my life and political work in my life, but it also had to do with just practice and preparation. What I did, and it was just someone gave me a bunch of strategies. What I did is I taped the shows. I had somebody tape the shows for a couple weeks. And what I did is I took a stopwatch that I used to use for running sprints in high school, and I would see when he has a hostile guest where he knows that he's going to anticipate profound disagreement, and I would time how long it takes for him to cut them off. I said, I'm shocked that you're surprised, and basically just made the only point I wanted to make. And it was extremely intimidating sitting down in the studio because he's really tall. And dude, he lauds over you. And
Jeremy was pretty cool during it, and he was giving his political views, which were very to the left of O'Reilly's.
He said, I don't really care what you think politically. And I said, obviously you do care, because A, you brought me on the show, and B, I told him that he uses 9/11 and sympathy with the 9/11 families and the lives lost to rationalize his narrow right-wing agenda. And it's unfair for O'Reilly to evoke both my mom and my father in the interview, especially when I wasn't. My mom is a grieving widow for a prematurely, a violent, horrific turn in their lives. My dad was only 55. They were working people, working class, middle class. They were not retiring for a while. And their life is basically destroyed. Their life together is destroyed, and destroyed in circumstances that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies, including Bill O'Reilly. You see him gesturing to security guards. Then came the after-film performance.
After they're off the air, he said to the kid something to the effect, "Get out of my studio before I fucking tear you to pieces." So Jeremy, and I've talked to him since, actually went to the green room to get a cup of coffee.
And the executive producer and the assistant encouraged me to leave the building because they were, quote, concerned that if O'Reilly ran into me in the hallway, he would end up in jail. Next day, I just turned on and watched the follow-up and saw my views totally distorted. Next thing I know, I was saying Bush planned 9/11. That paints me as a fringe conspiracy nut.
This kid said nothing in the original interview with O'Reilly about President Bush and his father, Bush the Elder, orchestrating the attack on their own country. He said nothing of that sort. Glick said, "Can I sue him?" And so I called the lawyer who was in my case of Fox versus Dutton and Franken. He says, well, the kid has to prove that O'Reilly knew he was lying. And O'Reilly is so crazy, he lies so pathologically, that it's harder to prove that O'Reilly knew he was lying. So oddly enough, if someone has a record of crazily lying, it is harder to sue them for defamation.
Many of the themes that are promoted on the Fox News Channel have to do with generating fear, whether that's fear of immigration, a fear of sexual difference, a fear of racial difference.
When you pander to fear, it's a great motivator and organizer. You've got to keep people alarmed.
That they really love this sense of fear and danger even when it's not there. And so when something is actually dangerous, as some things are, they go completely overboard. And all sense of perspective is lost. So that anthrax, which I guess affected 4 or 5 people adversely, no question about it, is far more dangerous than, the poisoning of our air.
The motivator is fear. And then the payoff is, we're going to go out and kill the bad guys. And, it's a very simple black and white world that they paint and portray.
Terrorism has become the all-purpose fear weapon because now everything is converted into terrorism. And of course, if you have a constant sense of unease, then you're going to look to the government to protect you. You're going to look to strong government.
There are these enemy out there. It's an ill-defined enemy, but as long as we're fighting them and we're killing them and he's looking presidential, then nothing else, again, is discussed.
What was interesting is in the climate of the Bush administration that much of that fear, the emotion, was purposely misdirected by the right wing into the war in Iraq.
The type of coverage Fox offers, and all of them offer, but Fox is probably the most pristine version, is completely consistent with Bush's, with the strategy of the Bush administration. To prevent discussion of things that are not going well, like, for instance, the economy or the Medicare bill.
There's no doubt that the war against Iraq, a country that did not attack us, could only proceed based on fear.
The first rule of being a great propaganda system, and why our system is vastly superior to anything in the old Soviet Union, is not that people think they're being subject to propaganda. If people don't think that, they aren't looking for that, they're much easier to propagandize. And that's the genius of our media system, is a system of ideology, of control, compared to an authoritarian system.
Fox has made a decision to present the Iraq War as a success and as an ongoing success.
The senior producer told the 2 or 3 writers for her news hour, she told us, now just keep in mind it's all good. This is such a fair and balanced issue. Keep it positive. We've got to emphasize all the good that we're doing. She at that point made a reference to rebuilding schools, bringing democracy to Iraq, and then she said, see, big progress. Yoo-hoo for us. Things were actually at that point going quite badly. Many more American soldiers were dying each day, and God knows how many Iraqis.
The People's Survey is interesting because you were looking at questions of basic true-false kind of factual nature. Did we find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? These are very simple questions with very simple answers. And what the survey found was that the more likely you were to watch Fox News Channel, the more likely you were to have completely incorrect assumptions about these things.
All the research shows a very high correlation in the case of Fox News with people watching it with having a very confused notion of the world on one hand, especially of foreign policy in the Middle East, and also being strongly supportive of the government in power. And this is an extraordinarily disturbing trend for the media. I mean, for any self-respecting journalist, if you're told the more people consume your media, the less they'll know about the subject and the more they'll support government policy. And that's exactly the worst thing any journalist would ever want to hear, or should want to hear.
In terms of Fox overall, I think we have got to appreciate, and when we look at them, is to understand that this is an adjunct of the Republican Party.
What Fox specializes in is punditry, basically getting marching orders from the Republican National Committee or some political operative, and then having people pontificate about it, have guests come on and talk about it, have pseudo-experts come on and discuss it.
Their main allegiances, I'm talking about the people at the top, is to the Republican Party.
Murdoch is absolutely, to his core, a partisan, and he makes no secret about that. So
The first person who made the call to say that George W. Bush had been elected President of the United States was the person who was in charge of Fox News's election analysis division, the people that crunch the exit polling numbers. That person was a gentleman named John Ellis, and he is George W. Bush's first cousin. At around 2 in the morning on election night, a new set of data had come in, and it was complex data from precincts all over Florida. The proper answer in analyzing that data unquestionably was you couldn't tell. It was too close to call. There was simply no clear winner. Instead, John Ellis called it as a clear win for George Bush. Fox News then interrupted its ongoing election coverage and announced that George Bush had been elected President of the United States. Now, what's significant about that is not the intervention of the president's cousin to declare his relative the new President of the United States. It was the fact that within minutes, ABC, NBC, CBS also fell right in line calling Bush as the winner. There's no way that they could have crunched the data in that time to come to that conclusion. In fact, quite the opposite. They should have come to the conclusion which Associated Press came to, which was that you couldn't make a call. When Fox made the call that Bush had won and the other networks followed on, that created the perception that Bush was the winner. In fact, he wasn't. But that perception was what really held for the next 37 days. And I would suggest to you that that call on election night had more to do with making George Bush president than any recount or ballot design issue.
In the old Soviet Union, you used to hear about the party line shifting 180 degrees. Watching Fox News at the end of Clinton, where it was all attack mode, where they were just vicious watchdogs, and then Bush takes power and they're like little lapdogs. It was like night and day, and it's a party line shift.
They will give you almost the full Bush stump speech, no matter where it is, and no matter how many times they've shown it. Go cut live to these campaign rallies as if there was going to be real news in them, as if Bush was going to say anything earth-shattering.
Fox portrays his every action as a heroic move, as something dramatic and significant. I imagine it's pretty hard for the Fox producers. Some days George Bush doesn't do anything interesting, and yet they've got to find something that makes him heroic that day.
Most people just started waking up and saying, oh, you mean we don't have the fairness doctrine anymore? I can't tell you how many times when I was a political candidate running for office, I would have somebody come up to me on the street and say, now, I saw your opponent on TV the other day. Aren't they supposed to give you equal time? And I didn't even know for years that we lost that in the Reagan era, that for years we haven't had the ability to expect both sides to be adequately covered.
Clearly, on the Republican side, what we do know is that for years they have coordinated what they call their message of the day. So you'll hear on the floor of the House, you'll hear on Rush Limbaugh, you'll hear on Fox and Rupert Murdoch's network, the issue of the day, which they will pound away at, which then creates the echo chamber, which resonates throughout America.
You see a picture of George Bush, you expect to hear organ music that would come out of a church swelling, the backlit head, the Madonna look, and then a picture of John Kerry flashes, and you hear the devil's voice. This is the devil, he is evil.
Every week, there's so many ways you can play the economic story. At Fox News, it's only the upbeat. They select statistics that prove the economy's moving up, and thank God for President Bush for doing it.
When the market goes down, one of the things you often hear is the market is worried about a Kerry victory. And how they know that the market went down because everybody had Kerry on their mind, as opposed to everyone was worried about interest rates, or everyone looked at the earnings figures and thought they weren't as good as projected. But they love to pretend that they're Karnak the Magnificent. They can read the mind of the market.
What makes Murdoch particularly dangerous is that he's foremost a politician. And he will use his immense media power to shape the content, especially the news, that furthers his interests and those of his allies, including the conservative Republican community. After all, Fox News is nothing more than a 24/7 political ad for the GOP.
MSNBC, I worked as a senior producer on the Phil Donahue primetime show. But at MSNBC, from the beginning, they were saying to us, we have to be balanced. And for months, they were telling Phil, giving him instructions not to be too confrontational. Don't be too partisan. Don't be too angry. You have to be balanced. Now, by the end of our tenure at Donahue Show with MSNBC, balance wasn't enough. And this is the Fox effect. They mandated that anytime if we had two left-wing guests, we had to have 3 right-wing guests. If we had 1 anti-war guest, we had to have 2 pro-war guests. And that's how we ended the show. So we're like trying to outfox Fox. You cannot outfox Fox. But MSNBC and the others have tried. CNBC has tried to outfox Fox. Since the corporate structures corporate ownership of the other channels does not allow anyone to counter-program against Fox, in television, the inclination is imitation.
It's influencing its competitors. That's why, MSNBC hired Joe Scarborough. That's why CNN in recent weeks has taken to reporting pretty much anything the Bush White House tells it to report. There is a sense now that there is money in the flag, and Fox knows that, and its competitors know that Fox is onto something.
Today, news business is geared toward entertainment. It's geared toward, in some cases, propaganda. It's geared toward, ultimately, the bottom line of a big corporation that owns the station, that owns the news operation.
It's called the news business for a reason. It is news, but it's a business.
They don't like to spend money doing serious stories. They like to do cheap, easy stories that will get a gut reaction.
The thing I think that distresses me more than anything else is that a lot of the news content is not coming straight out of the newsrooms, particularly in television, but out of the promotion department.
It's expensive to spend time exploring the issues. It's cheap, and everything now is a question of money.
If you go to the National Association of Black Journalists, or you go to the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, you talk to Asian American journalists who are on air, you talk to Native American journalists, you're seeing a diminution in the number of journalists that are locally based. Because in order to save money and in order to get economies of scale and scope, a lot of the broadcasters are shrinking their employee pool, and they're shrinking them in the news sectors of their stations. So a lot of the young, vibrant people who are getting experience as on-air talent in small towns are seeing those opportunities increasingly diminish.
When you let a small number of companies have this much concentrated power, they will always abuse it. It's simply unacceptable in a free society. And if you don't change the system, we can be having this conversation for the next 50 years. We'll be talking about Rupert Murdoch III.
Just as healthcare and the economy and the environment are political issues that people are familiar with, corporate control over the media is also a major political issue.
When you have one network that is so powerful and so intent upon warping the dialogue, it limits that discourse. It actually influences it to be a narrower discourse. And that's what I think citizens ought to be up in arms about. We can't accept this anymore. If we do accept it, we are handing on to our children and our grandchildren a lesser democracy than we inherited. And that's the one thing we don't have a right to do.
It's ironic that it's been, 30 years since Patty Chayefsky wrote Network. But I really believe that those prophetic words that were spoken by Peter Finch when he finally got out of the chair and said, "It's time. Go to the window, shake your fist and say, 'I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it anymore.'" I think those are resonant words today. I think people are genuinely upset.
Get off your rear end and become an activist. And if you see things that are biased, complain to the outlet and say you won't be watching it anymore.
Content has to change. Power has to shift. And I think the only way we can shift power is the only way we've ever been able to shift power, by directly confronting those who hold it and taking it back.
Policies have been made behind closed doors by very powerful special interests without any public involvement or participation. And what we've learned in the last few years is when the public gets aware of this and they start organizing, we can change these policies and we can make a system that actually responds to the needs of the people of this country.
America's digital destiny is hanging in the balance now. With the right activism, public outcry, we can shape a media environment so that in every community there are channels that actually serve the public interest.
If you are a citizen at home right now, when you turn on talk radio, all you hear is one right-wing nut or another right-wing nut. Why don't you go to the radio station and say, "I'm sick and tired of this. There are progressive voices out there. We want a balance.
If a Fox TV station in your town is broadcasting reports that you know to be inaccurate, that you know to be warping the news, you as citizens have power. Groups like Code Pink and others have actually demonstrated outside television stations and have made noise about it. We need to basically play the Paul Revere role to kind of ride out into the night alerting people that there's something bad going on here and something needs to be done about it.
Here's what I'd love to have happen. Family from Nebraska goes to Washington for the family vacation. We're going to visit the Air and Space Museum. We're going to visit the mall. We're going to visit the Vietnam Memorial. And we're going to visit the FCC to see a commissioner or two to tell them about what we care about. When that happens, you might start to see a little more attention. But, you know, it ain't going to happen if you don't try it.
We can actually win here. The whole strength of the system has been based on people being apathetic and not thinking they could do anything about it. As soon as we rise up, it collapses like a house of cards. That's the extraordinary development of the last 2 years.
It is not an issue of the right or the left. It is a populist issue about people finally saying it's their democracy and they aren't going to let 5 companies control the airways for corporate convenience at the expense of public necessity.
I come from a community in the state of Maine that's mostly fishing towns, small coastal communities, and for many years we were served by one radio station that everybody listened to. I mean, it was local radio. Every time I debated an opponent when I was running for office, everybody would tune it in their cars or their home radio, and they would hear what we were feeling differently about. And when Clear Channel bought it, that was the end. You couldn't even count on somebody looking out the window and telling you if it was a good day or a bad day or if the fog was coming in. But what was really interesting to me was that people got so angry, there was a local group that organized and attempted to get a low-power FM radio license. They had a hard-fought battle. Clear Channel opposed them, and they actually won, and now there is a little radio station operated out of a garage in that town. All volunteers. Anybody can play the music that they want, but at 5 o'clock every day, they tune in to the dialogue of what's going on in that community.
What we've been doing over the last decade is to create this alternative infrastructure so that we now have an online audience of 10,000 unique visitors per day to our homepage, plus the over-the-air audience of our new low-power FM radio station. And very soon, we're going to have public access TV in this community. So we've got 3 legs of a stool here of an alternative media infrastructure that gives us a means of communicating among ourselves and not just relying on the occasional letter to the editor in the corporate newspaper or almost no coverage in the broadcast media because they're all owned by Clear Channel and Sinclair or Fox.
When the Youth Media Council started, one of our first projects was to recruit unorganized youth of color, teenagers, and have them study the Fox affiliate station in the Bay Area. When we did the study, we were able to do an editorial meeting. It was the first time in probably 10 or 15 years that a constituency group locally had actually ever came and demanded anything from them. They just get to do whatever they want. Nobody cares. Nobody understands that they can demand anything. So it was a pretty momentous moment for us, you know, to both demand something and get it from a Fox affiliate, but also to be one of the first, you know, folks to come forward. And that's something that I think is a trend that we're trying to start now. Marginalized people don't have any concept that they can go to an editor in groups and demand something.